In this next segment, we're going to look at a couple of examples of dead drawn positions, at least objectively and according to the computer. But there are always human elements. And Magnus, I guess you've had a lot of experience in those types of positions. You know it's a draw, but you've got to keep searching for chances.
Definitely, especially if you figure that there is little risk, or at least the little risk you might take is worth it in order to be able to win. I think in such situations, especially against somewhat weaker players, it's very important to try and sense their mindset and try to understand like what positions they're aiming for based on their style and how they're feeling right then. And sometimes, as you will see, there is an element of pure bluff as well, going for a line that you know is either a draw or it might even be worse for you. But if you like understand that your opponent is not going to go for that, you can use it to your advantage.
Yeah, so lots of practical tips in this next segment. We'll show you the games in a moment. So in this next game, I played against Nils Grandelius, the top Swedish player. It was a 10-game match early in 2022. And I must admit my preparation for the match wasn't great. I didn't have too much time to prepare the openings. Nils as well, he's a good friend of mine. I've studied chess with him in the past before, so I was a bit worried. He knows all my secrets. He knows my style. He knows I like to grind. And I thought maybe he wouldn't let me get into those end games, get into those longer types of positions. And Magnus, I knew you were watching the match. You were surprised to see it even get organized, right?
Yeah, it was one of those matches nobody knew that they wanted to see, but once it was there, it was a massive hit. It was very, very exciting. Nils had a lot of interesting ideas as white, putting a lot of pressure. You were constantly in time trouble, trying to grind him down in some long endings. So it was a very interesting clash of pretty contrasting styles.
Yeah, and I've got to say my strategy beforehand was just survive the opening. And I mean, he's a bit of an opening expert. He's worked with you before, of course, as well.
Yeah.
And and I was on the back foot with black in every game, so I needed to strike with white. Ideally, I knew I needed at least to get in my type of position, and we'll see whether I was able to achieve that in this game. So I must say I chose this opening last minute on the I was in the mood for kind of maybe a slower game, and he played the Grunfeld, which I was slightly surprised by because I played the Grunfeld quite a lot. I thought maybe he would try and take me into territory that I didn't know so well. Played this line, which I think you've got some experience with.
Yeah, for sure. On both sides.
Mm-hmm.
I won a good game as black back in 2010 against Wang Yue as black, but after that, I faced it in the World Championship. Vichy played this against me in the first game in 2014, and then I've also played some games on the white side against MVL and Nippon Nishi. So it's basically a very good system for white. There are a couple of ways for black to play, but no very clear way to equalize.
Yeah, and I must admit I was expecting the main moves here, the bishop g7 or knight b6, but instead he played a move that actually I'd seen you played just quite recently, just in 2021 at the World Cup.
Yeah, that is true. So c5 is I don't think it was invented by, but it's to me it was like a do both move because he played it, and then basically in the World Cup I played it a bit on a whim. I knew that Dubov had played it before, so I thought,
who needs pawns anyway? Dubov definitely.
And then also I think I played the Grunfeld because my opponent usually didn't allow it, and then when he played bishop d2 at tempo, but clearly against Nils you were prepared. So
yeah, I had some idea here, and also it's because I was thinking I want the long grinds. He won't want to go into any slower variations or keep kind of too much tension. I knew he was being very direct the whole match, so I expected. I was preparing mostly for the other moves, but I expected something pretty direct. So c5 I did check, and I prepared this line because queens do come off, and as we know, grinders do love that. So we won't go into the opening details too much. White flicks in a check. It does become a bit symmetrical, but this is the key. Here, black's rook is attacked on h8, castles, which makes sense, and I am able to kind of get this long-term tiny advantage, I guess, of shattering black's pawns. On the other hand, black has the bishop pair, so it should be dynamically balanced, and yeah, obviously these days computers influence opening preparation a lot. So my next move was, I'm not sure it was a novelty, I think it's been played maybe in some correspondence games, but h4, just to try and push forward and activate the rook on the h file. Black pieces aren't ideally placed, right? And still some work to be done. Is this the type of opening you think maybe it's a good practical choice if it suits grinders' styles? Because I was very happy, I must admit.
Yeah, I guess it depends a bit on what happens in the next few moves. You can also see some dynamic potential for black with the bishop pair, but it looks like it should be fairly risk free as white.
Yeah, I'm very risk averse these days in my old age, so I was hoping it would be risk free. And white's bishop, of course,
yeah,
it does.
It's the star of the show at the moment.
Controls everything. Yeah, and okay, he played the move I was expecting. I think if a player's surprised, often they want to do something very direct. Hitting a pawn down here on a2, h5, and yeah, it's surprisingly difficult here for black. Actually, there's quite a committal decision by Nils. He pushed forward, which makes a lot of sense, but at the same time, black's bishop is not too happy about this. He drops back, then definitely no risk for white, and another kind of very modern idea, AlphaZero inspired. White puts a pawn on h6, and actually it's very difficult for black here to get out with his king. Maybe he should go back to g8, which is not ideal, because after king f6, I'd prepared f4, and white's knight, if it gets to g5, sorry, it's just going to be a monster.
Yeah, it's a very appealing idea. So as black, I would be looking at this line. I wouldn't like to move g5 really, unless I really wanted to play for a win very badly. I would think bishop g7. After h6, I would go king g8, and then I would start thinking about lines like b3, a5, and then I should probably make a draw. But
in this position, king back to g8.
Yeah.
Yeah, and probably you make a draw, but even computers show that I think white just plays knight e2, knight d4, and even some endgames. And maybe rook h4 is another move that computer was suggesting. And yeah, even these endgames, as long as white has a pawn on h6, should be a draw, of course, but difficult for black to defend.
And very little risk. Like the worst thing that can happen ever for white is some 4 against 3 where you lose h6 at some point. That's always going to be a draw.
Even if this pawn drops off.
Usually taking such pawns, both in the end game and the middle game, requires a lot of time and effort, and then you can use that time to attack other pieces normally.
Yeah, and time. Yeah, you mentioned I was in time trouble this whole match. This is, I think, the first time in the match
that you were up there.
Exactly. It was level up to this point. Okay, this was only game 4, but I was suffering every game. But here I finally got some opening preparation in. And okay, if we backtrack, he didn't swap off his bishops. He wanted to keep the long-term potential of this piece. He locked up the h-file. I developed, and he took a pawn. I guess this makes sense. I took, and here he started making some slightly strange decisions. Again, he was spending a lot of time. I think I'd mostly focus my preparation on f6, hoping to go back. White has some ideas. White can castle. White can play kind of f3, g4 in some lines, put the king on f2, and just kind of try and keep the kingside bind. Instead, he tried to be a bit more forceful. He dropped his bishop back, and after I castled, he went for a exchange. And yeah, this type of position already, I knew with best play should be a draw. Engines, of course, they say roughly 0.0, but it's just about putting the practical pressure on, I guess. And how would you approach a position like this with white? Would you kind of be looking for a backup plan first just to make sure there's no risk, or would you be just mainly calculating or have steps in mind already about how to play?
Yeah, I wouldn't particularly think there's a risk, or I mean, there is always a backup plan of going after the a7 pawn. I don't think that can be defended really. For instance, rook c8. If bishop c8, there is rook c1 to c7, which I don't think can be prevented in any decent way. So white is never risking anything, or not never, but at the moment not risking anything. Yeah, I would be a bit worried as white that my winning chances would be hard to find, because even if black's bishop pair is not effective at the moment, the light square bishop is supposed to be the star of the show, but it isn't right now. It has potential, but the other bishop has a long way to go.
Needs to come back here somehow.
Yeah.
And push a pawn, but it's not so.
Yeah, f6, e5 probably, but that takes time.
A lot of time, and it would weaken some light squares. So yeah, I think again, it's sort of about psychology here against a much lower rated player where I want to win at all costs. I would never really choose an opening like this, just because the margin for error is quite small. With 1-2 inaccurate moves, it's probably just a draw.
Yeah.
But against someone like Niels Grandelius, roughly the same rating as myself, a draw's not the worst result in the world if I can put some pressure on him.
Yeah.
I thought it was a good choice. And yeah, for the viewers at home, I think if you're playing someone slightly higher rated or similar rated, an opening or kind of steering the game in this course where there's minimal risk, it's quite a nice strategy.
Yeah, it's very interesting, actually. I think it's a mistake a lot of players make, including myself, that we're against like significantly weaker players. We're a bit too afraid sometimes to go into these positions with clear drawish tendencies, just because we're worried we might not win them. While against better players, we'll go into them without thinking too much, and we'll still win them a fair amount of time, not worrying about the occasional draw. So it's definitely something to think about.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? If we can beat the high rated players, I mean, I managed to win this game. If I can beat a near like 2650 player, surely I should be able to beat a low rated player here. But I would be reluctant somehow to.
Yeah, because you want to win it every time.
Yeah,
this is the point. You don't want to maximize your chances of not losing. You just want to maximize your chances of winning, and the balance is very, very hard to strike.
I mean, it must be tricky for you, Magnus. I mean, everyone's a lower rated player, so
yeah, that is true. But then again, a lot of people in top tournaments, they still try and beat me. So even if not sometimes, if sometimes not wholeheartedly. But yeah, it's definitely not easy, and I feel myself that I play better against the strongest players, like not worrying about potential draw at all most of the time.
Yeah, you're forced to show your best, and yeah, they let you play in a way. They don't try and shut the game down.
Yeah, but even if they do try and shut the game down, if you're playing white, usually they can't, and then even the smallest of advantages, like as long as you can't force a draw, as long as there are these little challenges, then it's hard.
Yeah, it's hard. And in this game, if we go back to it, after rook takes c8, we just looked at bishop takes c8. Didn't look great for black, putting his piece on west squares. c1 comes. So he just took. And this makes a lot of sense. He had to calculate a little bit here, but after bishop takes a7, I was actually reluctant to play this because it does allow black to trade off all the queenside pawns.
Rook a1, a6.
Yeah, a6, actually, this is quite interesting. There are some variations here. White can, for example, take.
Oh, I just assumed that this was fine for black.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is fine. And after takes, I was trying to see if it was possible to kind of play f4 here and kind of keep the rook. But I think, unfortunately, the rook does get trapped in some lines after f6. So
yeah.
So for example, if the white rook comes out again,
takes. I mean, you still have an advantage here, but
at least white is the only one who can win. Should be a draw with best play for best.
But yeah, it's still pleasant.
Still pleasant to have one through. So yeah, e-pawn is actually very hard for black to defend in a convenient way. So this type of thing was in mind, but after rook a1, I think he does it the other order, maybe bishop c4 first.
And then knight g3, a6, and you have nothing.
Yeah, unfortunately, knight f5, it looks nice and pretty, but the black bishop wants to come back to f8 anyway. And this knight hasn't achieved anything. e6 will come with tempo.
And then it could be worse.
Yeah, definitely. And suddenly, bishops, in the presence of kind of a bishop pair, right? Having pawns on both sides of the board, maybe it's not ideal for white long term. So, okay, here I was reluctant after rook takes c8 to take the pawn and initiate this kind of forcing sequence, but I did see that I can get a position that should be drawn. I can still ask one or two questions.
Yeah.
And here, okay, he goes for my b pawn, of course. And yeah, I was very proud of my play around here, to be honest, because obviously I can just take on e6 and no risk. Should be a draw, but I do have a better structure. The problem is that black, I guess here, if you gave black a couple of moves, he would...
Yeah, we put the bishop on f6 to begin with.
So, for example, if white...
Then everything's protected. It's
white makes a move. So, fortress, pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know you...
Yeah, you don't have to make that comment every time, but that's fine.
Yeah, bishop f6. I was reluctant. But yeah, so if the bishop gets round, then probably a draw. So we backtrack. I was trying to look for ways to delay this from happening, and I decided bishop c5, hitting e7. And yeah, I think around here, maybe he could have played a bit better. Maybe back to b7 is a better way to defend, just to keep this idea in mind. Bishop c7, he dropped back, takes, and rook c1. And yeah, he can't get this plan now. And next question, how would you go about defending this one if you had to knuckle down here as black? Very close to a draw, but no way to force it.
Yeah, it's a difficult question, really. Maybe I would just go super ugly with e5 and then king f7 to e6.
Makes sense. I mean, it's ugly, though, because of this bishop, right?
Yeah, it is.
And, I mean, for example, another thing that we could think about in endgames, say with something like this, if the rooks come off the board, draw, do you think? Or if white can, for example, get his king to e4, because we're always thinking about what pieces we want to exchange or want to keep on the board.
Yeah, it's interesting. There might be Zugzwang scenarios there, but you're not going to exchange the bishop. You're going to put the bishop on f6 once again, and you're going to say good luck.
Sit tight. Yeah, I mean, in hindsight, I think Niels would have preferred to play something like this, but that's the key when you're getting ground down. You have big decisions to make, and I think it's human nature not to want to commit.
Maybe, but I think this defensive job could potentially be fairly easy for black. He just has to make a few good decisions early, and that's a key point of defending these positions. That looks like everything draws, but once you make a couple of lazy decisions, sometimes the draw is gonna slip away, or the easy draw just slips away.
Yeah, and the easy draw maybe did slip away for the next few moves. He played king f7. Like you said, maybe black wants to put the king on e6, but now I was able to cut this out. I dropped back, and actually, I think maybe he made a good decision here, rook b5, but once the white rook gets in, which wouldn't have been the case if he'd already played e5, suddenly it's a bit tricky. If he plays e5 now, I put the bishop on c5, and it's very hard for him to get his bishop round to this key square.
Yeah.
I mean, for example, white has the idea of just improving the king, bringing it up the board. And we weren't sure here. We analysed a bit afterwards, and I don't see a plan for black, to be honest.
Question if he needs a plan. But
like life, right?
Yeah, it's hard though when you see that your opponent has a bunch of useful moves and you don't.
Yeah.
Then you can never be too sure that your position is holding.
No, that's true. And I mean, for example, if we just wait with black, I mean, black's bishop tied down to e7, so he can't really move it. Just to answer your question, I guess it would be a position like this one, where it's really ugly for black. You might have to put a pawn on a square like this one. And okay, maybe black at some point could come down and harass the white pawns. So, for example, if we put everything, wait, squares like this. Say black continues to wait. Yeah, the question is this one, right?
Yeah.
Does black need to wait? Do you find that hard, like just sitting and doing nothing in chess?
Yeah, it really depends on the position. If I'm sure that I can hold, then it's not a problem at all. If I'm not sure, then it's very unpleasant.
Yeah.
And I would guess these kinds of positions would be something in between.
Yeah, so I think that was the case for my opponent. He was caught in two minds. If you go back to the game, rather than kind of pushing and then sitting and waiting and doing nothing like we just showed, he decided eventually after a long thing to push this pawn. And
this could be a good decision.
Yeah.
And
we'll come to a position in a moment.
But it could also be a very bad decision. So it really depends on concrete ideas.
Yeah, so we'll show a position in a moment, and maybe we'll compare it to that position where that we just showed, where black has to sit and wait and do nothing. So here I blocked the fifth rank. Black was threatening to take this pawn, and he went back with his king. Now he can't really wait because his pawn has crossed into no man's land. It will be a target. So I gave a check. He came towards my rook. If he goes back, then
just gonna go grab the pawn. Huh?
The white king steps forward. Instead, he went towards my rook, forcing the bishops off the board. We see more exchanges and 3 versus 3.
Yeah, this is obviously a draw. I mean, let's be clear about that. But the pawns are really. I mean, it's hard to imagine 3 against 3 being a lot uglier on the same side. So he still has his work cut out for him, at least a little bit.
Yeah, and I guess some players might be tempted to just offer a draw, not even try here with white, but definitely there are small things that we can aim for.
Yeah, it's the best position you've had all game.
It's at least the most beautiful position I've had all game. So here, it's actually tricky for black as well, where to put the black king. He went backwards and...
It's natural.
Yeah, trying to come towards his pawns. And I thought, okay, let's at least test him, make these small little questions and cut off his king.
Yeah, always make him a little bit uncomfortable.
He decided, okay, he doesn't want his king cut off. Very natural, offering a rook exchange. I did calculate this one actually to try and figure out if it's a draw or not. But I do think it is a draw with best play. This is one that you guys can analyze at home. So instead of wasting time calculating too much, I mean, for example, here black isn't even forced to exchange the rooks. He can even flip his rook back or bring his king forward first. Rather than spend too much time calculating, I thought, okay, after rook f5, let's ask another question.
Yeah.
What do you want to do with this pawn? And again, it's difficult if black's rook just goes back to defend it.
Yeah, it looks awful.
Yeah, suddenly all the weaknesses are attacked. Black's king and rook will be stuck defending. And white can slowly kind of push forward at will, bring the king up the board. Again, doing nothing, but this time in a position where white can improve. And instead, h5. And I don't know if you were watching this game, Magnus, but stylistically, do you think winning chances here for white as well? I was getting very confident, despite the fact I knew it was definitely a draw.
As I said, the pawn structure is pretty bad. You're putting the pawn on h5 is not ideal. For sure, it makes it more of a target for the king. And I wouldn't like to be black here.
Yeah, and again,
even though I'd be very disappointed if I didn't draw this as black.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and of course my opponent was very disappointed. And again here, I could cut the pawns, I could put forward to free up my king.
But why?
Yeah, why? Why not play rook a2, wait 49 moves, then push the pawn, and then start moving the king off the board. But here actually my opponent made a decisive mistake, and I could already tell he was trying to calculate that black shouldn't be calculating at all, right? Black should just be looking for the best squares for his pieces, or just sitting and waiting and asking me what I'm doing. But instead, maybe seeing ghosts, he tried to cover the 4th rank. He was scared of my king coming forward, but now he gives away the key 5th rank. Suddenly, we see why provoke this pawn to the h5 square. It's still a draw maybe, but suddenly black cannot defend this pawn sufficiently. And king g6, for example, defending the pawn. g5, overworking the black king, and here black is completely frozen. f4 will come, king h4 will come, and this pawn will just drop.
Yeah.
And okay, question for you. He gave a check, and which way would you go here, Magnus?
Oh, this is very interesting. So the game becomes a bit concrete. In case of king g1, you're threatening g3, so black probably has to play king g6.
Mm-hmm.
Then we go rook e5, king f6, f4, and then let's say king f7. So now the question is whether you can win with rook g5, but I'm guessing you can't. You can also play king f2, but then rook h2, he's kind of holding on, because you were threatening g3. So yeah, this is not, at the very least, it's not obvious.
Not obvious.
How you do it.
If we go back and compare.
So there is also king g3, then rook h1, I believe, is forced. Now you have rook a4, but then the rook goes the other way.
Trying to swing, but that rook goes back. It wants to be on the 5th rank.
Yeah.
Defending. Yeah, here it's also tricky to make progress as white. I mean, at least the rook has a safe square, right?
Yeah.
And here, I mean, being in time trouble and it's about to be move 40. Yeah, I think I had maybe 1 or 2 minutes to make this decision, forward or back. And I think 90% in endgames, you want to go active, right? You want to go forward with the king. Yeah, I decided to go back purely because the black rook now is almost trapped. And in those lines you mentioned, yeah, it's running out of squares. So king g6, and rather than try and force it, I think there's another clever way of winning a pawn here.
Yeah, you can actually put black in Zugzwang. So black probably wants to go rook e4 if he has a move. So you play f3, take away the square.
Yeah.
And then black plays the rook to c4, b4. He's in the same predicament after rook e5. And otherwise his rook is getting shut off by the pawn on e4.
Yeah, exactly. Here, black is completely frozen. The white king just marches up the board and wins this pawn. And as you say, after this f3, the chance this rook will get trapped if you leave it there. And yeah, again, my first instinct was exactly what you mentioned, to stop this rook e4, getting black's rook out of trouble. I wanted to play rook e5, and I think I spent all my remaining seconds pretty much just calculating whether this was a win, but I couldn't see a way to improve for white. So
because I would think in those other positions as well, having the pawn on f4 rather than on e4 is quite favorable because you're helping the other pawn advance
later this one.
Yeah. And cementing a weakness on e6.
Yeah, but I guess here, even in these quieter rook games, some calculation.
Yeah.
And there's no way to prove for white.
Yeah, there's just no way.
So yeah, instead I put the pawn forward, and okay, my opponent waited. We saw if the black rook goes away, then rook e5 was annoying, so he waited, and suddenly, yeah, this rook is about to get trapped.
Yeah, so he has to go rook f4.
He has to give up pawn.
Now we enter a new phase.
Yeah, we enter a new phase, and I don't think we need to go into too many details here, but just to show the next, the kind of key couple of moves. He attacked my rook. I repeated just because I'm slightly sadistic, and I like drawing out, asking those questions, drawing out the game as long as possible. And now I went to a more active square, and I went around for a couple more repetitions, and I realized actually his rook still lacks squares. His rook can't get out of its prison at all. So simply, for example, if black's rook could somehow plant itself on the b2 square, maybe it's still a draw. Or maybe at least very good drawing chances, but no way to get to an active square. Tried to get round this way, but now g4 shut out the rook again. White's just going to step up the board.
It's still stuck on a bad circuit.
Yeah, and I think there was maybe one more critical moment in this game where I did make a bit of a mistake. I did give him one chance to draw, and heroes, again, just maneuvering around, trying to use a different angle to go for these black pawns. And in this position, if black goes forward, it's important to give a check. And we win a second pawn here.
Yeah, and if he goes the other way, king f6, rook f5, king e6, g5, it's an automatic win.
Yeah, king is cut off once more, and yeah, we just go up the board with our king. So, okay, I gave a check. I think I'm still doing everything right here. But it was in this position I started making a couple of small mistakes, and then I even blew the win just for a move or two. But here, this is the downside of being a grinder, I feel. I was reluctant to push my pawn to g5. I mean, here I should just be king 8.
We're enjoying our position a bit too much, yeah?
Yeah, that's the problem with being a grinder, and we'll talk about that a bit later. But yeah, sometimes you have to seize the moment. You can't just sit forever, and you can repeat moves. You can just enjoy the position. But here I enjoyed it too, as you say.
Yeah, I think Boris would have gone for king h4 and g5.
Gelfand would have ground this one down immediately.
Yeah,
he would have.
Yeah, I think I would as well. At least these days, now that I'm a bit less patient than I used to be.
And it's like a fine balance, right? Being patient, but also moving in for the kill at the right time. So instead, just to show what did go slightly wrong, I gave a check. He went back, and in a few moments' time, I realized just a bit too late that this is why you need to know your technical rook endgames, or technical endgames in general if you're a grinder. I realized too late that after taking, this isn't even sufficient for a win. 2 pawns, but white's king is just terribly placed. And it's strange, E and G pawns, not so easy in these rook endgames. And yeah, if we fast forward a few moves later, instead of taking that pawn here, black actually has a really nice defensive setup. He can just push his pawn to e6, and there's no way through. It's actually a fortress. I can no longer get my pawn to g5 in a kind of convenient way. So this one I'm going to put more out there in the notes. I definitely recommend you guys to go and play through it. There's a lot of instructive moments in the rest of this endgame, but eventually, to show the win, I did manage to push my pawn. I was able to push it later in a different way, and the white king slowly snaked its way forward. Just repeating a bit, and the white king.
There's nothing you can do.
No. If he gives a check, for example, the white king goes the other way. Yes. So yeah, I turned that draw into a win, and I guess you've had many similar experiences there. It takes patience.
It does, but not excessive patience, as we could see. Yeah, it's really surprising to see how easy it really was from such a drawn position, and just goes to show, even very very strong players, maybe sometimes especially strong players, because they see a lot, they see all your ideas, then they sometimes overthink as well. Like a weaker player might choose like the more obvious defense, and they may be right, while a stronger player would see the obvious defense, they would see your best try, and they would not be sure. Maybe they can't see a forced draw there, so they're going for forced draw somewhere else that doesn't work. So the dynamics there are always very interesting.
Yeah, it's like life. Overthinking can backfire. So grinding out results, even when you're not playing at your best, is a bit of an art form. There's a football cliche that even the best teams, when they're not playing so well, they always know how to win 1-0 in the end. And Magnus, we're about to look at a game where I mean, you mentioned yourself, you weren't playing at your best, but you still got the result in the end.
Yeah, that's an understatement. This was a truly awful game on my part. I mean, my opponent played really well in parts of the game, not so well in other parts. But overall, I just played well below my usual level. So we'll start here with a really, really bad move. Just knight to d5. There are several things that are wrong here. First of all, I hadn't seen rook d5. I only saw it after the move.
Wow. That's potentially quite a big...
yeah, that could have been very bad. Fortunately here, it's actually not so bad. It's just unclear. But essentially, I was just lucky that it doesn't lose. And secondly, he can go queen c2, and I have nothing better than to go back and protect the pawn. Fortunately, my position is quite decent positionally still, so I'm not in trouble yet.
Yeah, and I guess that takes kind of humility to just take a step back. You mentioned that knight going forward, coming back, you lost 2 tempi, but I guess some players would be stubborn, right?
Yeah.
They'd forcefully, for better or worse, find a way to not go back.
Yeah,
not admit the mistake.
I guess it does to some extent, but in this particular case, I didn't feel like I had much of a choice, so that was fine. Anyway, let's continue. General mistakes were made, but we'll not delve way too much into them. Here, I thought I was gonna eventually win the game. Because of his poor bishop, but he definitely has enough counterplay as the game goes along. Also, h4 was nice, giving him some extra squares, so I try and bring the king around.
So we reached the maneuvering stage where things did slow down.
Yeah.
It's nice.
Eventually, he goes here, and basically, I have some positional trumps. I have a passed pawn. I have a potential weakness on a3 as well, and you could argue that my bishop is a little more active than his. But I think his other pieces are well placed, and he's just way too active for there to be any realistic chances. Yeah. So
I guess he's got a blockade on the dark squares as well.
He definitely does. And really, in some positions, I could just be worse as well. Here, imagine like, if I move, it goes like rook f4, then queen f2, king g3,
and yeah, you're completely stuck there.
I could be stuck. I think I'm still fine. I have ideas like queen c7, but I didn't see how to win. So I decided just to trade the rooks, even though I believed that was just a draw.
So here you weren't thinking about the result too much. You knew it should be a draw with best play, but you were just trying to knuckle down and look for chances. So was it just that you were, I don't know, trying to get rid of the middle game and focus on?
Yeah, I was just trying to keep the game going. I didn't really believe I had too many chances. I was pretty pissed about the whole thing. I was especially pissed because the team captain of the opposite team, at some point, like he was watching the game, and he asked me like, draw? And I was like, that's none of your business. Please shut up.
That's between you and your opponent.
Yeah, that's between me and my opponent. It was especially telling a few moves later, which I think is really the key moment of the game, right here. So this was really, really important because he did not exchange queens here. Essentially, exchanging queens leads to an easy draw. He's just going to put the king on f4, and then he won't take the pawn on e4. Maybe that holds, but he can just go back and forth. He can just shuffle his bishop on these squares, or f1 even. Doesn't matter. Position is a dead draw.
Yeah, even if bishop h1, if you push a pawn to g3, for example, he can just ignore it, right?
Yeah, it doesn't even have to take it.
Not letting the black king active.
Yeah. So this was a really key moment, and I think it was around here that the team captain was talking about the draw, and I was like, please, I understand. I mean, the match was over, but I really wanted to.
Your team had won, right?
I really wanted to try and win as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned as well, like you'd kind of got inside his mind. You kind of assumed he was trying to avoid the queen exchange at all costs.
Yeah.
You somehow knew what he was thinking.
For sure, and what he explained to me after the game is simply that he thought it was a draw after the queen exchange, but he thought it would be even easier with the queens on the board. That he could just keep it active, and he would always have perpetual check. So this was a very important psychological moment, because I figured that if he didn't exchange queens once, I could offer the queen exchange favorably again, or basically just continue the bluff.
Bully him with the idea later.
Yeah, this was this you will see later as well. So we move around. There really isn't much for me. I have to come back. I offer the exchange again.
Second bluff.
Yeah. Now I centralize the queen. We move around a bit. Try to bring the king over. But it really isn't easy. Here as well, I think he could have gone queen h7, gone for the e pawn, but then I go maybe queen f6. Maybe he saw some problems there. Anyway, I'm not risking all that much. So I gave a check. Now bishop f1. Maybe after king h2 there was queen f6. Maybe this worried him a little bit. For instance, king g1, there could be g3, although that does run into mate in 2.
I was going to say some checkmating ideas for black,
yeah.
Yeah, for white as well.
But maybe now king c7.
Threatening g3.
Threatening g3, maybe this was his worry.
White's queen is suddenly misplaced,
Yeah. Although then bishop e4, g3, bishop f3 seems to win. So I don't think he had too much to worry about.
It's about planting these ideas in your opponent's mind, right?
Yeah,
and letting them overthink and worry.
Absolutely. At this point, I don't have any particular ideas myself, so yeah, I just have to...
So you were going move by move here, or was there some schematic plan?
Yeah, I had some plan of bringing the king around. As you can see here as well, he gives a bunch of checks, and at least now my king is slightly closer to coming into the game. And there is a plan now that if I do exchange queens and he can't bring the king to f4, then my king is just gonna move like a bishop all the way and capture his queenside pawns.
Like a very slow bishop.
So we continue maneuvering. Not much is happening still. King h7. Now, I don't remember exactly what I was doing, but at least now, yeah, I think I wanted this position with this king on h2 so that there would be checks. And now I bring the king to e6. And his queen is a little bit misplaced now.
Not active.
Yeah. And here, we've actually reached a point where my position is winning.
Wow. Okay.
Because the aforementioned plan with king d5 is, it's just unstoppable. Just move in at this point. Unfortunately, I went for another plan. I thought it was winning, but I made the same grinder mistake that you had made earlier. I thought I could go for the plan later on as well. So I decided to offer the exchange of queens first.
Not seizing the moment then.
Yeah, I figured here that that he would that in case he exchanges queens, for instance, like this, I think he's just a little bit too late. For instance, like this, king b3, and
you have two passed pawns, right?
I have two passed pawns, and
g4 and a4.
Yeah, and also I believe the exchange is hopeless. We will queen simultaneously, but I will be at least two pawns up.
Yeah. Giving the first check helps.
Yeah. In this case, it probably doesn't matter, but here it just means that I'm 2 pawns up with a completely winning position.
So this is the kind of counting the race that you were looking at?
Yeah, for sure. But now he's got the chance to bring the queen back. No, I can't really walk in with the king anymore because he has a bunch of checks. Mm-hmm. For instance, this would be a nice way to lose the game.
Ouch, a skewer.
Yeah. And so I continued to wait.
Yeah. Were you starting to get worried about the 50 move rule? I'm trying to do a quick count of how many moves it's been since the last pawn push or the last capture. It looks like already like 30 something moves at this point. The last capture was on move.
Yeah, so about 33. No, I figured I still had some time. I can always flick in G3 if I want.
Mm-hmm. That's something that every grinder has to have in their mind, right? 50 move rule.
So anyway, here he kind of lost the patience and went for queen d2, and
gave up a pawn.
Gave up a pawn. Here, surprisingly, it's still a draw.
Wow!
Because he can go e3,
kicking your queen to a worse.
Kicking and then start giving checks.
And there's no way out for the black king.
But that was already.
That's difficult.
That's difficult, and it was short on time as well.
Yeah, humans just give checks and hope for the best.
Yeah, exactly. So he gave a check, and another one. Still here, there was queen f6 followed by e3, which still would have made it pretty difficult for me. But he went for e3 immediately, and then he resigned.
So why did he resign here?
I don't understand. I didn't understand really why he resigned. I think he could still have fought on like king g1. I probably try and play it safe by bishop d7. There's no perpetual.
Can hide safely.
Yeah, I can hide and
put the black queen on g4 to defend the bishop.
Yeah. Black queen g4 next, and this should win. But
never resign. This looks.
Yeah,
like he can fight a bit more.
Yeah, for sure. Anyway, yeah, e3. The problem is he just missed queen h4, and so he resigned kind of in disgust, and probably also because of everything that had happened to his position. And he thought he was making a draw for sure, but
I guess you broke his spirit with those small kind of steps you were making.
Yeah, those weren't even real steps. It was just.
I guess you want to point by this point, at least.
I think in terms of defensive technique, this is instructive as well. So when your opponent offers you the exchange of queens, don't automatically believe that that is a good thing or a bad thing.
Yeah. Sometimes you might have to call their bluff.
Yeah, you might have to call their bluff, and sometimes you shouldn't as well. Sometimes there is a trap. But in this case, if you believe that it's a draw, just go for it. And yes, indeed, the position is a dead draw, even if he doesn't exchange queens. But it becomes a little bit harder to prove concretely.
Yeah, and he's now in the mindset that he can't exchange queens.
Exactly. So that already gives me huge psychological advantage. But this was tough.
Yeah, and so you managed to win this game despite not playing your best. Earlier, you mentioned a couple of mistakes. And is there any way you recommend for some of the viewers how to train that, or is it just resilience? Is it just kind of focus on the moves themselves?
Yeah, I guess it's resilience. Don't give up. I had nearly given up in this game, trying to win it. But I think really the decision just to allow the exchange of queens here, I think this was a decisive moment. If he exchanges, there's no way this game is anything other than a draw. And once he didn't exchange, the result was wide open.
Yeah, instructive lesson. Even when you're not playing your best, look for those small gains and keep the game going. We'll join you in the next chapter.